All right, I'm here with Philip Beyer, who has been nice enough to come down and talk about the deck that he used recently at the Star City Classic in Milwaukee. Made it all the way to the finals with this deck. So, first of all, talk about a little bit about Legacy as a format compared to, like, I know you also play Modern.
Yep.
How do the two formats compare in your experience?
Well, a lot of cards are shared in the format. A lot of the most powerful creatures were created in the modern time. Things like Stoneforge Mystic, Tormorgoyf, Noble Hierarch, Deathrite Shaman. They were created recently, but the powerful spells like Show and Tell and Force of Will and Sneak Attack were created back in Magic's beginnings. And so Legacy is really a culmination of the most powerful spells and creatures you can be playing, along with the best dual lands possible, the original duels, the original 10. So Modern, I believe, is more diluted Legacy most of the time. You've got things like Jund and Delver that you see in Legacy, and then you also can see in Modern. So I think, in a way, the formats are similar, but also very different. The ways the games play out can be similar. Right now, we've got Jund in Modern, and it's taking over, and mid-range is really good. There's a lot of mid-range decks in Legacy. You got Leovold, you've got Tormorgoyf, you've got Taziger, you've got True Name Nemesis. You got these cards that they're just big creatures. They're just strong, and that's So I think the format's also ever evolving. From my experience, I've played Legacy since 2015, on and off. But for the most part, it changes quite a bit. From the inclusion of Deathrite Shaman to the inclusion of True Name Nemesis to the reprints of some cards. It changes a lot. So I'd say it's pretty similar to Modern in that way. It changes a lot. Modern has changed. From its conception, and Legacy has changed a lot. But you just get to play with more powerful stuff. Sure.
And talk about your deck. What was the deck that you were using?
Yeah, so for the tournament in Milwaukee, I used the deck called Maverick. It's, from what I understand, its in original state was back in 2012 when Legacy was just beginning in a way. That was when it was really strong. And it's pretty much stayed the same throughout its years, but using the same threats. But the base of the deck is a Green Sun Zenith package, which is the green X spell from Scars of Mirrodin that says you can search up a green creature equal to how much mana you spend. And so the deck kind of works like Birthing Pod in a way. Birthing Pod was an old Modern card where you got to pretty much sacrifice a creature and find a better creature in your deck with one CMC higher. But Green Sun Zenith just says, hey, find whatever you want. So in the deck, there's things like Gaddock Teeg, which says your opponents can't play, or any player can't play X spells or spells greater than 4. So things like Engineered Explosives, Force of Will, Jace the Mind Sculptor, other Green Sun Zeniths can't be played anymore. So that's kind of a lock piece. You got Scrub Ranger, which has protection from blue. We've got Scavenging Ooze, which is really good against graveyard decks and burn. And then we have Kasali Pride Mage, which is really good against artifacts and enchantments. So that's the kind of like hate package. It also plays similar to Death and Taxes, which is a deck which has been around for forever, where you use your lands of Wasteland and Rishadenport to stop your opponent's lands, and then you use your creatures like Thalia, Mother of Ruins, and Stoneforge Mystic to stop your opponent. So that's also a part of the deck. You got 4 Mother of Ruins and 4 Thalias because everybody plays spells in Legacy. You got Brainstorm and Ponder, and you got Lightning Bolt, you still got Thoughtseize, and you've got all these cantrips that Modern doesn't have. So if you can play a Thalia on turn 2, half of people's hands just stop working. The Delver player's like, I guess I'm done playing for a little while. But then what I believe is the strongest part of the deck is the Knight of the Reliquary package, which really isn't much of a package in a way, but it's just 4 Knight of the Reliquary, you got 4 Wastelands, and you've got tutorable lands, and you just thin out your deck, creating these huge creatures that gets Wastelands every turn, or gets a Karakas, or gets a Gaia's Cradle, gets some bigger stuff, but overall, the deck is really a combination of a lot of things that incidentally work together to fight the format.
And talk about each round in the tournament.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, what kind of matchups did you come up against, and and obviously you found your deck working pretty well against
Yep.
them. So talk about why they worked well against each
Yeah,
match.
so Maverick has been traditionally good against Delver strategies. Delver of Secrets and the deck itself run very few threats, anywhere from 13 to 17, where it's just, Delver of Secrets, some Young Pyromancers, some True Name Nemesis, and some Gurmag Anglers, and then a bunch of spells. So if almost half their deck is spells, Thalia is really good, and Thalia was really good during this tournament. And then I just play bigger creatures, and it's hard for them to remove it. So I was anticipating a lot of Delver. Grixis Delver has been really big right now. That's by far the #1 deck. If you've got the ability to play that deck, I'd encourage you to play it because it's good against everything. So it's incidental that this is my only Legacy deck, but I also felt that it was strong against the #1 deck in the format. So going into what happened, round 1 I played against a show and tell variant. He used a wide variety of win cons, but pretty much what he would do is he would show and tell in Omniscience and then do whatever he wants because he gets to cast his spells for free. My deck is kind of good against combo decks. If I can play a Thalia, and then if I can get a Gaddock Teague, decks like Storm or Show and Tell generally are really stunted to the point where they can't do anything, and then I'll just get another Reliquary down and then beat them down. So that's kind of what happened for round 1 at least. Round 2 I played against a blue-white Stoneblade deck. Stoneblade is that deck has been in the format forever. It's not been as good recently with how strong Delver is, but essentially what you do is you have Stoneforge Mystic and whatever you want. You could do Lingering Souls, True Name Nemesis, just beat down with your Stoneforge Mystic. But really it's a blue-white control deck that just has Stoneforge Mystic in it, and you got Batterskull and Umezawa's Jitte. So in a way, our decks were kind of similar. We were fighting the same fight, trying to get a big creature out that was attacking, but then he gets to play counter magic. Luckily, my deck's pretty good against counter magic because I've either got so much mana that I can play lots of things, or I've got just stuff that's stopping him from doing things. This was the first time actually in the tournament that I was able to play Titania, Protector of Agaroth, which, if you guys don't know, Titania, Protector of Agaroth was in the 2014 Commander set. Excuse me if I'm wrong with that, but she was definitely the best card in my deck during the weekend. Titania is a 5-mana. When she enters the battlefield, return a land card from your graveyard. Whenever a land leaves play under your control, create a 5/3 elemental. So by herself, she's kind of like Young Pyromancer, Young Pyromancer makes a lot of elementals, fills the board up. Titania fills up the board, but she fills it up with bigger things. And that was my first time that I was able to do that. And that was my one spicy card for the tournament. I was like, let's try this card out, It was good, So with Knight of the Reliquary and Titania, if Titania goes on the field, she will return a fetch land, and then I'll have my Knight up. My Knight says sacrifice a forest or a plains to be able to search your deck for new land. So in one turn, I was able to sacrifice 3 lands and get 3 5/3 elementals. And all my opponent has was a True Name Nemesis and a Batterskull, which for a lot of decks is scary, but I was able to make something scarier. So I was able to win that one, of course. The third round was the first time playing against Grixis Delver. Actually, was my first time playing against Grixis Delver. I had understood that the matchup was good for me, but it was the execution that's important. A lot about Legacy is kind of understanding the matchups and understanding how your deck works and how your opponent's deck works. That's really important because there's a lot of ins and outs of the format and the cards themselves and the matchups. But I was still confident with it. One thing that's really, really good against Delver decks is the card Choke. Choke is from Tempest, and it's similar to Blood Moon in a way, but it says islands don't untap. Grixis Delver decks only play islands, whether it's tropical, volcanic, or underground sea. All they have is islands. So if you're able to sneak that in under a counterspell, they are incapable of getting it off the field. Blue, well, unless they have a bounce spell, blue, red, and black don't deal with enchantments very well. So that was a key way that I won against him. Round 4, I played against Bug Delver. Similar to Grixis Delver, that you get to play Deathrite Shaman and Gurmag Anglers and True Name Nemesis. but you trade out Young Pyromancer for Tormaglyph. Just hit harder. That round was tough, but also not tough in a way. Game 1 he had lots of Deathrite Shamans, but my Deathrite Shamans and my big creatures, just overpower in a way. And then the second game I was able to choke him again. So that was round 4. Round 5 I played against another Grixis Delver. In total I believe there was 5 Grixis Delver in the top tables. So if you split it up into the top 8 people that were playing, there was at least 5 Grixis Delver. So when I would look down at the table from my left or right, I'd be like, this is the format that I want to be playing right now.
That choke card that you mentioned,
Yep.
Is that a card that's commonly in the Maverick deck, or is it something you put in there?
That is commonly in the Maverick deck. That's commonly in green decks. It was actually reprinted in 8th edition, so it's actually in Modern as well. But Modern right now isn't all about islands. Modern right now is all about, how fast can you get your hollow ones out or get, your affinity cards out, stuff like that. But Legacy is faster in a different way. And if your Delver opponent just can get a lot of creatures out, but not have the counter magic, and you can sneak choke in, that's a game winner. That's a game ender,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, choke used to not be in my sideboard because the choke was kind of like, yeah, I guess it's really good against islands, but I also want to be really good against everything else. Turns out the format really is all islands. You're either playing islands or you're not playing islands, and there was a lot of people playing islands that day, so I was happy about choke. Choke was, if it was normal to play 4 chokes, I would have played 4 chokes. That's how happy I was resolving my chokes that tournament. So yeah, with round 5, played against another Grixis Delver. It was really interesting. I lost game 1 against him, and I was able to win a game 2 and a game 3 solely to sideboard cards. Stuff like choke, extra removal spells in Zealous Persecution and Abrupt Decay, more Sylvan Library to get more card advantage, because they get to brainstorm, but green decks don't really get to draw cards. So if you can draw cards against a blue deck, that's really good. So yeah, I felt good to be able to know that I could win game 1s and game 2s on the play or on the draw. Just showed how powerful the deck was against Grixis Delver. My final round, and then I just played against another Grixis Delver, and I went as swimmingly as you would expect. I believe I used choke on my opponent for that one too. Thalia is really good. Knight of the Reliquaries, they only play non-basic lands, so if you can get wastelands out as quick as possible, that's really good against them. And then for the final round of the Swiss, it was a 7-round tournament. I drew with the player who eventually won the whole thing. So we were the first and second seed of the whole tournament. We were the only ones that were undefeated, so we just drew. The top 8 was, I believe, a Storm, Delver, Omnitel, Bug Delver, Death and Taxes, me, Elves, and another Grixis Delver. So there's a good amount of things that I was good against. Like I would have been happy against any of the Delver decks or any of the combo decks like Storm or Omnitel. Incidentally, the only matchup I was really worried about was Elves, and he was on the other side. For my quarterfinals, I played against a Grixis Delver, so that was my 4th time playing against a Grixis Delver, and I was like, all right, okay, sounds good. Interesting story about this matchup, or this game in particular. I was doing pretty well. He had a True Name Nemesis, particularly for decks like mine, Maverick. They have no way to kill a True Name Nemesis in the main deck. If those of you unaware of True Name Nemesis, True Name Nemesis enters the battlefield and it chooses a player, and then True Name Nemesis has protection from that player. Designed for Commander, where there's multiple people, and you're like, oh, I hate that guy, he can't kill my guy. In a constructed format, when there's only 2 people, True Name Nemesis is pretty darn good.
Sure.
So for decks like me, where all my only removal is Swords to Plowshares, the best removal, but not good enough, it can be kind of difficult. But the one thing that beats it is Sword, Fire, and Ice. Stoneforge Mystic enables us to use equipment that are super strong in the format, like Umezawa's Jitte, Batterskull, and any of the swords. But Sword of Fire and Ice gives me protection from blue and red, which is all of the Delver deck. So if I'm able to attack and he's not able to block, because I've got protection from blue. So we can kind of go back and forth. The game ended up being very back and forth to a point where there was pretty much like I was at 7, and he had Young Pyromancer and a bunch of tokens, and he was at 8, and I had a guy that had protection. And my opponent actually did make a mistake, actually. He was resolving a Brainstorm, which says draw 3 cards, put 2 back from your hand on the top of your library. And he looked at his 3 cards, and then he went to shuffle his library as though he was resolving a Ponder, which is incorrect. So that was the first time that I actually had to call a judge that tournament and be like, hey, my opponent's doing something a little different, and we need to resolve it. So then this was my first mistake of the tournament. In a way, the judge ruling was that I got to pick the 3 cards and put them back on top. Because we didn't, he didn't know them. Well, he knew them, but I didn't know them. So I got to pick the Brainstorm and put it back in an order. What I ended up doing was giving him 3 fetch lands, as opposed to 3 dual lands or useless cards.
Right.
And so I gave him a chance to, draw like a lightning bolt to win the game. He luckily didn't, so it was an interesting, that was the first time I'd ever had, a situation where I'd had a card resolved, they had a card resolved incorrectly, and I had to do something so that was, everyone was watching at that point, everyone was watching the top 8, but everyone was watching at that point like, holy cow, what's happening? What's gonna happen here? And then game 2 against him, was able to play choke, and that was all she wrote for that one. All right, then for my semifinals, I actually played it against my first non-blue deck. That was my semifinals was the first time I played against a non-blue deck. It was Death and Taxes, which is incredibly similar to my deck. It's got Mother of Ruins, it's got fast mana with Aether Vial, it's got Wastelands, it's got Thalia to stop spells, and it's got Stormforge Mystic to get strong equipment. I personally believe that I'm pretty good against, Death and Taxes, because they're doing what I'm doing, but I'm doing it with stronger creatures, like Knight of the Reliquary, Scavenging Ooze, I've got Deathrite Shamans, of course Titania. Game 1 was a bit of a wash. I was able to overpower with some strong Knight of the Reliquaries very early, and getting my quick mana early was really important. And he incidentally, he bricked on finding creatures to equip to his equipment, so a good game for me. Game 2 was a really stally game. Some games in Legacy can go for a long time, because when everyone's playing with lock pieces or hate cards or just strong things in general, you can kind of get in a board stall and you can kind of sit there for a little while, looking at each other. He eventually found Mirren Crusader, protection from green and black. I was unable to find Swords to Plowshares, and he just killed me. And the final game was my second time getting to resolve Titania, also with a Knight of the Reliquary. I believe it was turn 5. He had just played a Gideon, and on my turn 5, I Green Sun Zenith for 5, returned a Verdant Catacombs, sacked it, and then activated Knight of the Reliquary, getting another one. So turn 5 was able to put 20 power on the board. He was like, oh, that was a lot more than I expected for your turn 5. So yeah, no, that was a good example of just green, powering out a lot of stuff really quickly. Yeah. And then for the finals, finally got to play against an awesome opponent playing Elves. This was actually his first time top 8ing a tournament. So really proud of him. He was really awesome. But Elves is traditionally just a bad matchup, just because for creature decks, Elves is doing something that is vastly ridiculous in compared to us. If you're just playing Stoneforge Mystics and Tormagoyfs, you don't want to play against 10 Elves on turn 2. And so that's what he did. I was able to get some things like Gaddock Teague and some of my sideboard cards like Containment Priest to stop some of his threats, but he was able to use Glimpse of Nature, which allows you to draw a card every time you play a new creature. He cycled through his deck and found Craterhoof Behemoth and win both times. So he did what he had to do, and I did what I had to do. But yeah, so that was the tournament. I was able to play second out of, I believe, 148-ish people.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that this is your only Legacy deck.
Yes.
Is there a reason for that? Is this are you that confident in this deck, or?
Yeah. Back when SCG, Star City Games used to do, they used to run their tournaments in a way that it was one format, on one day, so on a Saturday, and then the next format would be on the Sunday. So they used to do a Modern or Standard on Sunday, and then they would do a Modern or Legacy on Saturday. So growing up when I was in high school, I got to watch a lot of Legacy. That's where I watched a lot of Legacy back in 2013, 2014. And back then, that's when Maverick was good. I've always been into junk or Obzon in Modern. Things like Wilt-Leaf Liege, Knight of the Reliquary, Noble Hierarch, Voice of Resurgence. That was the stuff that I was playing with in Modern. And when you see it doing almost just as good in Legacy, with the same similar cards, Knight of the Reliquary and Noble Hierarch and Scavenging Ooze, you're like, wow, that's obviously the deck for me. Had a lot of good friends in our area back in my freshman and sophomore year, encouraged me to start building the deck. And for those of us that have taken a while to get into Legacy because of the kind of price barrier that there is, sometimes building your first and maybe only deck is kind of like a culmination of a lot of things. Some money there, selling some decks here to buy some cards, and it's a big project, and you kind of become passionate about one deck, and that's what I did. I became passionate with Maverick. I felt that just, it always had a chance against something. You put cards in like Umezawa's Jitte. You put the Stoneforge Mystic package with the sword and the Jitte, you can beat creature decks. You put things like Thalia and Gaddock Teeg to beat Storm. You've got Knight of the Reliquary to beat down on, land decks and stuff like that. So I always thought, even if it's not the best deck, even if it's not the Grixis Delver or the lands or the Eldrazi decks or whatever the popular deck is, I think it always has a chance. And I was always proud to, say that I was playing Maverick, Sure. Like it's not in the limelight anymore, but it's what I like to play, and so it is my only deck, but it's the deck I like to play. So yeah.
Well, congratulations on your top two finish, and thanks for coming down and talking to us. And
definitely.
And I think it's really exciting that you did so well there. So thanks for talking to us about your deck.
Yeah, definitely.
Offering some strategies and things.
Oh, definitely. Yep. Always a pleasure.
Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
If you haven't played Legacy, I would encourage it. If you've got a hometown shop and a group of people, who want to play Legacy, find a way to do it. If your shop is okay with 15 card proxies on Saturdays for a non-competitive little league, or if you've got some people that just like to, print out little pieces of paper and build decks whatever you want because you don't want to buy the cards, do it. Like you don't have to own these cards to play this format. It's a really good format. I think it teaches a lot of us about Magic's history. I'm playing with cards from 1994 and cards from literally last weekend. I mean, it's really cool. It's really cool to see. I'm a collector in addition to a player, and it's cool to own, a piece of history in a way, and then to play with it as well. And even if you can't do that, even if you can't own the dual lands, playing the format is just as fun. So, encouraging the people around you to find a way to play it, I'd say would be the best course of action. It's such a fun format. I wish I had more time and more ability to play it, So, yeah, that's definitely what I want for any Magic player out there. Try Legacy.